Imagine your plane crashes in the middle of a mountain range, not near a town, not near a road, not even near a forest. Just endless snow, freezing temperatures, and towering peaks in every direction. Now imagine rescue teams search for you, and then give up. For the next 72 days, you're completely on your own. This isn't a movie plot. It's the true story of the survivors of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, one of the most extraordinary survival stories in human history. In October of 1972, a group of young rugby players, their friends, family members, and several crew boarded a plane in Uruguay. Their destination was Santiago, Chile. The trip was supposed to be routine. Most of the passengers were excited about an upcoming rugby match. Nobody expected their journey would become a fight for survival. Bad weather forced the flight to spend a night in Mendoza, Argentina. The next day, conditions improved enough for the pilots to continue. But flying through the Andes Mountains was never simple. The towering peaks created dangerous conditions, and pilots often had to navigate carefully through narrow mountain passes. As Flight 571 crossed the mountains, the crew believed they had already cleared the highest peaks. They hadn't. Thinking they were safely past the mountains, the pilots began descending. Then disaster struck. Without warning, the aircraft slammed into a mountain ridge. The impact tore off one wing. Moments later, the other wing ripped away as well. The tail section separated from the aircraft. Passengers were thrown violently through the cabin. Some were killed instantly. Others suffered horrific injuries. The remaining fuselage slid down the snowy mountainside like a giant sled before finally grinding to a stop. Then everything became silent. The survivors looked around. They weren't at an airport. They weren't near civilization. They were stranded high in the Andes. The first hours after the crash were chaotic. The survivors pulled injured passengers from the wreckage. They searched for anything useful: food, blankets, medicine, anything that might help them stay alive. Many passengers were badly injured. Some died during the first night. Others fought to stay alive despite broken bones and severe wounds. The survivors quickly realized they needed to work together. There was no other option. The wrecked fuselage became their shelter. It wasn't much, but it offered some protection from the freezing wind. Outside, temperatures regularly dropped below freezing. The snow stretched endlessly in every direction, and there was no obvious way out. At first, they remained optimistic. Surely rescuers would find them. After all, a missing plane would trigger a massive search effort. Every day, survivors scanned the skies. And soon, they heard aircraft overhead. Search planes. The sound filled them with hope. They waved. They shouted. They did everything they could to attract attention. But the planes never saw them. The white fuselage blended almost perfectly into the snow-covered landscape. Again and again, search aircraft passed overhead. Again and again, they disappeared into the distance. The survivors could only watch. Days passed. Food supplies began running low. The passengers rationed everything they could find: tiny pieces of chocolate, a few snacks, small amounts of wine. Every crumb mattered. The cold drained their energy. The altitude made simple tasks exhausting. And still, no rescue came. Then came the moment that changed everything. One of the survivors managed to use a small radio. Through the static, they heard devastating news. The search had been called off. Authorities no longer believed anyone could still be alive. The world had stopped looking for them. Imagine hearing that. You're alive. You're waiting to be rescued. And then you learn that everyone has already given up. For many survivors, it was the lowest moment of the entire ordeal. As the days stretched on, a new threat emerged: starvation. The food was gone. There was simply nothing left to eat. The survivors faced a choice no one should ever have to make. A choice that would later become one of the most discussed aspects of the story. After agonizing debate, they decided to use the bodies of passengers who had died in the crash as a source of food. It was an unthinkable decision, but they believed the alternative was certain death. Many struggled deeply with the choice. Some refused at first. Others wrestled with feelings of guilt and horror. But over time, survival instincts took over. The decision allowed them to continue living. It remains one of the most controversial and emotionally complex chapters in survival history. Just when it seemed things couldn't get worse, they did. One night, an avalanche crashed down onto the wreckage. Snow burst through the fuselage. Survivors were buried. Several people died. Others were trapped for days. The avalanche destroyed supplies and crushed morale. After everything they had already endured, another disaster had struck. Yet somehow, the remaining survivors kept going. By now, it had become clear that waiting was no longer a strategy. If they stayed where they were, they would eventually die. Someone needed to leave. Someone needed to cross the Andes and find help. The idea sounded impossible. The mountains surrounding them were enormous. Many survivors believed civilization was nearby. In reality, they were far deeper in the mountains than anyone realized. Still, one man refused to give up. Nando Parrado. Parrado had already lost his mother and sister in the crash. He had every reason to surrender to despair. Instead, he became determined to save the group. Along with Roberto Canessa and Antonio Vizintin, he prepared for an expedition into the mountains. The plan was simple: find civilization, or die trying. The men set out carrying minimal supplies. At first, they expected to reach lower ground quickly. Instead, they discovered the terrifying truth. The mountains stretched endlessly beyond the horizon. Every peak revealed another peak behind it. The journey was far larger than anyone had imagined. Eventually, Vizintin returned to conserve resources. Parrado and Canessa continued alone. For days, they climbed through snow and rock. They crossed ridges more than 14,000 feet above sea level. Their bodies were exhausted. Food was scarce. Failure meant death. But they kept moving, step by step, day after day, toward the unknown. Then, after more than 2 months stranded in the Andes, something incredible happened. The men spotted signs of life. Eventually, they encountered a Chilean muleteer named Sergio Catalan. Communication was difficult because a river separated them. The men wrote messages and threw them across. Catalan finally understood what had happened. The survivors weren't dead. They were still alive. And they needed help. Immediately, he alerted authorities. Rescue efforts began at once. Soon, helicopters flew into the mountains. For the first time in 72 days, hope became reality. Rescuers reached the crash site. One by one, the remaining survivors were evacuated. After more than 2 months trapped in one of the harshest environments on Earth, they were finally going home. Out of the 45 people originally aboard Flight 571, only 16 survived. But their survival remains one of the most remarkable achievements of human endurance ever recorded. The story of Flight 571 isn't just about a plane crash. It's about resilience. It's about impossible choices. It's about refusing to give up when every reason says you should. When rescuers stopped searching, the survivors kept fighting. When starvation threatened their lives, they adapted. When an avalanche struck, they endured. And when the mountains seemed impossible to cross, two men walked anyway. 72 days after the crash, they proved something extraordinary. Sometimes survival isn't about strength. It's about hope and the decision to take one more step when nobody expects you to.